You've been watching Mark Zuckerberg being grilled over the last 2 days. On what topics did you come away reassured? And on what topics did you come away more concerned?
Well, I was pleased that Mark Zuckerberg agreed to testify, that he subjected himself to 5 hours of testimony, both in the Senate and the House. This was long overdue. Facebook should have been testifying much earlier. And I was pleased that he's at least open to well-crafted regulations. I was concerned on two areas. One, it seemed that the Senate has a knowledge gap. Many of these senators haven't really used Facebook and Twitter, and it was apparent after they asked their first questions and Zuckerberg parried back, they were really unable to press him or get into the depth. And second, it's not Zuckerberg's job to just clean up the mess. It's Congress's job to regulate, to pass laws, to have strong protections. We're the ones who were elected to protect the American public. And there wasn't a sufficient commitment or discussion about what an Internet Bill of Rights would look like.
What should Congress do then?
Well, I think that there's some very common sense things that we ought to do. First, you ought to have a right to know your data. For example, if you want to know your financial information, you can go get your credit report. You can know who's asked for that credit information, who is trying to get information about you. You should have the ability to do that with all your data. You should be able to inquire of Facebook or Twitter or Google or Cambridge Analytica to give you a report of your data. We have these rights also for health. Second, you should be able to update your data. Third, you should be able to move your data, delete your data. Europe has a comprehensive set of these rights. I think the European regulation goes too far, but we should take some of those principles and have a robust framework here in the United States.
That said, we're talking about a massive data breach that happened on Facebook's platform, on Facebook's watch. We're talking about an election that was meddled in by, state actors on Facebook's watch. And in both cases, Facebook had warnings. Facebook knew about these issues before the company revealed them to the public. So where did Facebook fall short, in your opinion?
Well, they clearly did fall short, and they need to assume responsibility. First, they fell short in disclosure. All the reports I've read suggest that they should have, and they knew about this, a breach back in 2015. They didn't notify the users. They didn't notify the FTC. They didn't notify the press. Had they done that, a lot of the harms may have been avoided. Second, they clearly didn't have sufficient oversight. I mean, to have being paid in rubles and to have Russians buying ads and not knowing about that, or that not setting off alarm bells is deeply concerning. And third, they allowed false propaganda to spread and go viral on their social media site without any verification. I'm glad they are now owning up to the mistakes. I still believe in the power of social media to do good, but there were clear abuses, and they need to be transparent going forward and make real efforts to fix it. But that's not enough. Congress also needs to regulate. We can't rely on the self-regulation of Facebook or tech companies.
A lot of the questions today focused on Facebook's tracking of users off Facebook, including users who never signed up for it in the first place. Should Facebook be able to track user behavior across the internet off Facebook, even if they don't have a Facebook account, which means they could never agree to the terms of service?
Well, this is exactly why we need an Internet Bill of Rights. So, for example, if you use Firefox, the Mozilla browser, Facebook would never be able to do that because Firefox contains your data. Whereas if you use for the Safari browser, they may give the cookies or that data to Facebook if they have agreements with Facebook. And you actually have to go change on your iPhone the default settings on Safari to say, no, I don't want my data shared. This is what I mean where members of Congress need to be using these platforms more. They don't need to be computer scientists or coders, but they have to understand what these platforms do. And we need to then have laws saying, let's move to a world more like Mozilla Firefox, where users clearly have the right to know what's happening with their data and to have their data contained so Facebook can't do these searches. It's why, for example, you could go on the internet, surf the internet and want to buy ties, and suddenly on Facebook, even though you've never liked ties, you start seeing ads pop up with ties and marketing them to you. And you say, why is that happening on Facebook? It's because Facebook often has information that advertisers have shared with them. And I do think an Internet Bill of Rights would stop that from happening.
You've said that we can't leave the security of our elections up to an internet entrepreneur. Facebook says it's working on new tools that will be in place before the midterm elections to prevent what happened in 2016 from happening again. Do you believe them? And if not, how concerning is that? And what can Congress do? Isn't it really on Facebook at this point to make sure that doesn't happen again?
I do believe they're acting in with good intent, but think about this, Emily. I mean, they've grown from a platform of a few 100,000 people to 2 billion people in 12 to 14 years. It's really an extraordinary platform, and it's an extraordinary problem. And I don't think we can just rely on Facebook's word. Congress needs to do two things. First, we need to significantly fund the National Science Foundation, MIT, Carnegie Mellon, research universities, so that we can do the type of research in machine learning, in artificial intelligence that is going to be necessary to protect our national security and to prevent this kind of Russian meddling or other types of interference. That's for Congress to make those kind of investments in research and in development, and we're not making those investments. Secondly, we need to have a right to individuals having a right to secure data and making sure that there are ad disclosures. Senator Klobuchar has a bill along that lines so that Facebook is required by law to comply, and that will put added incentive on their engineers to really come up with a solution if they have a legal liability that incentivizes them to do that.
But that's not necessarily going to happen before 2018, before November.
You're right. I mean, unfortunately, given the speed with which Congress moves, I'm not optimistic that these laws are going to be passed before that. And all I would say is until then, Congress should try to act as much as we can, because we are putting ourselves at risk without those laws. And I do hope that Facebook and other tech companies will realize that more of these breaches is going to further erode the public trust. These are platforms that largely were widely admired. I still think, as I travel around the country, there are a lot of people who look to tech with a positive framework, a positive sense, and they risk losing that if there are more and more of these breaches. So I think it is in Facebook's self-interest and a lot of tech companies' interest to put as much resources behind this to solve the problem. But it's not going to be easy, and there is vulnerability there.